Welcome to a further edition of NPPF Flashpoints. This is the fourth and final issue, looking at the draft NPPF that's been published at the end of last year and due to come in as new policy in the summer of 2026. I'm joined today by James Corbett-Bircher, who is a junior barrister at Number 5 Chambers, and our guest today is Phil Jones of PJA. Phil is the chairman of PJA, and he was, as most people know, a key author of Manual for Streets in 2007, and then the lead author of Manual for Streets 2 in 2010. He's been involved in all kinds of innovative work all over the world, carrying out research and carrying out information. He's also been involved in the 20-mile-an-hour zone in Wales, and his work takes him all over the world. We're very, very glad to have you join us, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. And my first question is to get straight on and ask, what is this vision-led approach and what are we to make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it represents a real shift. I think, obviously, the transport assessment and transport planning is fundamental to the selection of sites and then assessment of their impact and needs for any transport modifications or improvements. In the past, the whole TA process has been rather sort of encapsulated by the phrase predict and provide. In other words, we say, what is the predicted traffic generation of the site, and we distribute that on the network, and we assess the capacity, and then we provide the transport capacity, or whether it's sustainable transport improvements necessary to deal with the predicted traffic movements. Vision led, and the term has been sort of moving around a little bit. Some people call it vision and validate. Some people have called it decide and provide, but vision led seems to be the term that is now settled on. He's saying, okay, well, what do we want the transport characteristics of this site or this area to be? What level of movement of car traffic, if it's that, do we expect people to make? Do we want people to make? And then how do we engineer, plan, design the site and its transport services so that we get the outcome that we want? That's absolutely fine in principle. And a few authorities, Oxfordshire in particular, have produced some quite detailed guidance as to how to do that. And Trix has also produced some guidance, but it's not really become mainstream yet. Most of the transport profession is still really engaged on what we might call predict and provide processes. But clearly, government wants to see that shift, and in theory, that's very laudable.
So, I mean, there's TR 6.4,
Hmm.
and it's likely to make TAs, easier or more complicated?
Well, I think the way TR 6.4 is written, actually, it'll probably make TAs more complex, which for those firms like ours that produce them is probably a jolly good thing. And it talks about all reasonable future scenarios should be considered. And certainly the Oxfordshire guide is rather like that. It talks about lots of different scenarios. So, what would be the kind of business as usual approach, and what might we then expect if we get mode shift or greater internalization of trips, and therefore we have multiple scenarios. The difficulty for the highway authority and the decision-making body is which of those scenarios do they give weight to? And I think the problem that we have here is that there's a real lack of nationally endorsed guidance about how to do this. The theory, the principle is reasonably clear, but the practicality of doing it, what data sources do you use, what weight do you give to different scenarios, how much confidence can the decision-making body have in the outcome, and what's the relationship with the travel plan, which could be regarded as the kind of fail-safe mechanism if we don't get the outcomes that we want, and then the travel plan is there to change things post-occupancy. But where is the teeth in those?
So, what you're saying is we need some national guidance to support this.
Yeah, indeed. And we know that DFT has been working on this for 2 years and up. And it will come out as a part of the PPG, the planning practice guidance. But where it is, we don't know. And it's, I think, regrettable. And the Transport Planning Society, which I'm a member of, has been asking the department to share drafts with practitioners. We understand there have been some drafts of the guidance shared with local authorities, but we haven't seen them. And I think those of us who are involved in the production of transport assessments, that we could hopefully make some useful comments and come out with some guidance that will really help everyone to avoid excess work and uncertainty in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very unfortunate if you just talk to local highway authorities about this. That is just a completely asymmetrical consultation exercise, isn't it? I'm going to hand over to James then.
Thank you, Chris. So, Phil, we've got the severe adverse impact test still there within TR6.
Yes.
I wonder what your thoughts were on how the guidance has been clarified or just reworded by government.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In a world where the NPPF is caring perhaps more or as much, but maybe even more about sustainable transport, then having a test which only applies to highways and traffic, I think is not supportable. I think it's good that it's there, and the severe impact is now focused on all modes of transport. I mean, it's something that London in particular has been doing for some time. So the transport assessment guidance in London actually doesn't really care very much about congestion at all. I think it accepts that London is congested in terms of traffic. And what it cares more about is congestion on the buses or the tube or the cycle network, because that's where it wants to see the investment put in. And I think perhaps this is the NPPF kind of catching up with that and saying, yes, severe impact is still there, but it's not just about the capacity of the roundabout serving the site. The chances of bus capacity being the tipping point, perhaps outside cities, is quite limited. But I think the principle seems sound to me.
What are your thoughts about the distinctions between inside settlements and outside settlements in the context of transport impact?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I think some of us have been talking about this, and one reading of the within settlement test 4, isn't it, in the NPPF? It pretty much says that if you're within a settlement, it's only quite a narrow set of NPPF policies that it's possible to refuse against, and transport is not one of them. Interestingly, I mean, it's a density, good design is. It'd be interesting to see whether some authorities might argue that a site that is poorly accessed could be considered to be an example of poor design. That's probably not what MHCLG intended. So, yes, it could be argued that within settlements, actually, we don't really care about traffic impact or transport impact capacity at all. It might be one that some authorities might find difficult to accept, but on the face of it, certainly some people have felt that it might mean that urban transport assessments are going to be more around kind of accessibility and sustainability and less about the numbers of movements and their impact.
Yes, so we've got S4 there, inside settlements, and then S5 in respect of outside settlements, probably going to be one of the most contested areas, one would think.
Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts there about the distinctions drawn. We've also got PDL, but then we've got this critical test of sites within walking distance of railway stations. What are your thoughts on those aspects of S5 for outside settlements?
I was quite surprised when I read that. It seems to me to be quite a narrow policy. Government seems to view railway stations as very, very important, almost out with their importance as a piece of transport infrastructure. I mean, obviously they do enable people to make journeys, but it's quite a small proportion of journeys and travel that is made by rail nationally. The car is still the biggest proportion of journeys and travel, probably followed in most places by walking. Walking is really important. So while rail is really important for long journeys, it doesn't actually carry a huge amount of travel proportionally. So quite why the government has singled out railway stations as the most important determinant of where you would put development outside settlements. The walking test, perhaps we'll have a conversation about the 800 metres, but even putting that to one side, you can get to railway stations other than by walking. You can drive to them. Perhaps that still is a more sustainable thing to do, drive a short distance to a railway station and park. Or you can get the bus or you can cycle. So why walking is the only determinant? Do we have to have this very tight kind of transit-oriented development around railway station that's purely based on a walking distance? It seems rather a kind of arbitrary set of parameters that have just been put in without a really lot of kind of scientific thought. Because interestingly, we have the connectivity tool, which we know Department of Transport are very, very proud of. And it's quite a groundbreaking thing that actually puts a numeric assessment on any 100-metre square location in England and Wales and tells you how well connected you are by different modes for different journey purposes. So it's quite a sophisticated tool. Perhaps it's still got some way to go. But then in the policy, that's not applied apart from PDL. But yes, if it's a greenfield site, it's purely walking distance to a railway station. Very narrow policy, I think.
If I can pick up on that in particular, this 800 metres, I do struggle with the idea that 800 metres is the appropriate distance. As you say, first of all, there's the other modes. I have friends who get to railway stations on scooters and mopeds, and it doesn't take up a lot of parking space, and then they make a long journey after that.
Yeah.
But even with the walking distance, it seems to me to be a very metropolitan, a very London-centric view. Oh, right, well, let's have these 800-meter concentric rings around each of the stations. But you think about the rest of the country, to be within 2 kilometers, 2 miles of a railway station would be considered to be a very sustainable location, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, clearly it does fall off with distance, and I did have I knew we would talk about this, so I did have a quick look, and there is research. I think only 15% of walking trips to stations, I think, across the country are longer than a mile, but that's 1.6 kilometers. That's twice as far. So we can obviously think about our statistics and a bell curve, but what point is it reasonable to say that that's a reasonable distance? If you take the 85th percentile, which is often used as a kind of yardstick, then yes, you could think about kind of doubling that. In terms of developable area, is 4 times the area, isn't it? If it's twice the radius, it's 4 times the area. In terms of the viability of development or locations for mixed use or housing led development, it's a significant change. So yeah, it does seem to be something that I think certainly deserves a lot more scrutiny. And the 800 meters, I think the figure has been lifted from, well, it was in PPG 13 a long time ago, wasn't it? Was used. So it's a figure that's been, and we know that it's a rule of thumb that is often used, 800 meters or 400 meters to a bus stop. But it's also not something that has a huge amount of basis in data.
No. And, as you say, really, very vividly, look at the additional area that would be caught within, say, 2 kilometres or 1.6 kilometres being a mile. Much larger areas. And if the government wants to build lots of houses and have mixed use development near railway stations, then why on earth would it just be 800 metres around a station? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, does it, really?
It doesn't really. And even the sort of assessment of 2 trains an hour in each direction, that doesn't tell you about where those trains go. It doesn't tell you about what are the journeys that people in that site could make. I mean, it could be a remote railway station and the nearest destination is quite some distance away without very much there. Whereas the connectivity tool or some other kind of evidence-based assessment of trip attractions and where and perhaps employment opportunities or education would actually assess, well, yeah, that's fine, but does this railway station or this tram stop or this public transport hub in another form, does it actually give the accessibility to places that people might actually want to get to make this location a sustainable one?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a site coming up soon in Potter's Bar, and it takes you straight into Moorgate, straight into the centre of London in about half an hour. Surely people might travel a bit more than 800 metres to get into the centre of one of the major cities on the planet, I would have thought, probably.
Absolutely. I mean, and in a way, this is why in the past people have talked about 800 metres to a station, 400 metres to a bus stop. It's a very crude way of saying normally a railway service is regarded as higher quality. It takes you further and faster. So people are prepared to walk further to that stop. Again, that's very binary. As you say, the quality of the connections that you get, the speed of the journey, or even the quality of the walk route. Because if it's a pleasant walk, then you would walk further. We know that. So yeah, it's extremely crude. I think it's perhaps a good way of putting it.
Yeah, great. I'm going to hand back to James.
So the connectivity tool is one example of incorporating another document by referencing this. And we have another example at what is, I think, currently footnote 56, a direct reference to Manual for Street, which I know is a document you're very familiar and experienced in. I just wonder what your thoughts were. It's in under TR4 Street Design Access and Parking. And then we have there the principles set out in National Design Guidance should be used to inform how this policy is applied. So what are your thoughts on that reference and, of course, your experience of what's happening to Manual for Streets generally?
Well, I think it's good to see. I mean, Manual for Streets is an old document now. The first version came out in 2007. It was written in the year or two before that. So it's 20 years old. And the need for a Manual for Streets was actually identified in a piece of research I was involved with that was done in 2002-03. It's a very old thing. It's been a long time coming that it's been referenced in national policy. That's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. But the problem is that the existing document, there's some principles are sound and maybe even timeless, but there's a lot in it that is superseded and needs updating.
What could you say about what direction that should take, what you understand about what work has been done about manual for streets?
We had manual for streets 2 in 2010, and which was really trying to apply it to busier streets and existing streets. And then a long time with nothing. And it was not until around 2019 that there was an effort made to recognise that it needs to be updated. And there was a piece of work done by the Policy Lab, part of the Cabinet Office, who actually looked at manual for streets and said, is it still working? Is it fit for purpose? And what needs to be done to bring it up to date? And they concluded that it had succeeded partially, the document, but there was still a lot of what I might call poor practice out there, very kind of car-centric street design and overuse of national highway standards, DMRB, the design of even sort of quite minor roads. And so there was a place for manual for streets, but perhaps the reason it wasn't being taken up as much as it should have been by engineers was that the original document and the 2010 second document weren't quite detailed enough, or weren't detailed enough to really be used with confidence by practicing engineers. So a refresh was needed, but it should be much more detailed, more focused on the technical outcomes. And subsequently, WSP was appointed to produce that. That work was completed in 2022, but was rather disrupted by COVID. But then since then, it still hasn't seen the light of day. But most recently, through membership of some organisations that I'm on, there has been a consultation of a new document, a new version of Manual for Streets that the Department for Transport has circulated to those institutions, to those organisations. I think because they wanted to try and meet MHCLG's ambition to have the new document ready for the new NPPF. But sadly, it falls, I think, in my view, and quite a lot of people that have seen it, quite well short of the detailed technical guidance that is needed to fix, if you like, the problems in the original Manual for Streets. So we're rather still waiting for that to happen, I think.
Yeah, well, that's very unfortunate, isn't it? That a lot of time and effort was spent updating a document, recognised that it needed updating in 2019, and here we are in 2026, and it still hasn't happened. And the updating of that document, which we used in all planning applications, and it just seems extraordinary to me. But there you go.
So, Phil, I understand that the new guidance was going to include further description with respect to visibility displays.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there was research in Manual for Streets 2 that said visibility displays, which we spend an awful lot of time at public inquiries debating visibility displays and whether we can get a safe access into a development site. Research in Manual for Streets 2 concluded that there really wasn't any evidence that they had anything to do with road safety. And people found that very hard to believe. So the department actually commissioned some further research through CIHT that came to the same conclusion with a slightly more sophisticated analysis, but it came to the same conclusion. And so my understanding is that Manual for Streets draft, or the document when it eventually does appear, will include the statement that development should not be refused on a lack of junction visibility, which is quite extraordinary, I think, and will come as a surprise to many developers, practitioners, highway authorities, but that's the evidence. And it should mean that an awful lot of brownfield sites, in particular, that are currently held up because of lack of visibility and suitable access, can be released. And that will be of immediate help, I think, to housing delivery targets. You're quite why it's taken so long. It doesn't need a whole Manual for Streets update to release that. If the research evidence is there, it can be published, and a short technical note from DFT to say that, it seems to me. So, but there we are. It seems to be kind of stuck in the system.
Look, Phil, thank you very much for joining us. We're very, very grateful to you. I know how busy you are.
Thank you.
And we are extremely pleased that you've been able to come and spend some time explaining these matters to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you.